out is a 2000 Honda Forman 400 ATV. Had some ignition problems with it. As you can see, when you turn this switch on, you should get a red light, and then if it's in neutral, a green light. I didn't. The red light's the oil pressure light. Wasn't getting any of that. It started out doing it intermittently, and then one day I just turned it on and it wouldn't come on at all. Went online, downloaded the maintenance manual on it, went on to several sites, chat sites, and everything that I found on the internet concerning this problem or similar problem didn't exactly address my issue. So I thought maybe I would just go ahead and make a video of what I found out, what happened, and what all I went through to actually solve the problem. Most of the wiring diagrams and the troubleshooting in the manual, they address things like the neutral reverse switch, the fan control box, I think it's ICM they call it, even the light bulbs, checking those. Some of them, some portions of it even talk about the ignition switch itself. So I went over to a Honda dealer, spoke with them about it. He says first thing he came up with was, is the battery charged? Well, yeah, the battery's charged. He says, how about the circuit breaker on it? There's a breaker here, and that's the 30 amp breaker. And then you also have a fuse box. I've got all this stuff pulled out, which is quite a hassle, actually. And so from that point on, he says, well, it's probably the ICM or something, not likely the switch. So I asked him specifically, what if the switch is not getting power? Maybe that's my problem. Didn't seem to think that that could be it. So anyway, long story short, I started digging into it, looking at it, and the wiring diagram shows again that there is a red wire that goes into a 5-pin connector and comes out of the 5-pin connector, goes up to the front of the machine, up under here, which is a real hassle to get to. And there's another 5-pin connector somewhat down in there. Okay? You can't see it. You just got to get down on your knees, and basically all of this needs to come off in order to get access to it. And I actually was in the process of taking all this off. I've actually got quite a bit of it undone. And then I noticed that, again, like I said, I went into the wiring diagram again, and it shows two 5-pin connectors. This one here, and again, the one in the front. So I said, if I could just determine if I'm getting power to this switch, then if it's getting power to there, then I know maybe I've got some type of electronic problem or something like that, or something in the reverse switch or the oil pressure sensor or something to that effect. Had to take this handlebar cover here. You just pop this out. There's 2 screws in there. You take it out. Then you can get this up enough to where you can actually pop this switch out, but it doesn't come undone here. The harness runs down to the 5-pin connector under the front. Great engineering. Anyway, I was trying to figure out a way to see if I was getting power here. Finally, the only thing that I could come up with, and it's probably not, would probably be ill-advised from a mechanic standpoint. They'd probably tell you not to do it. But if you notice, this tester has a very sharp pin point on it. And so what I did was I actually took this and pushed it into the red wire that goes into the switch and did a ground test on it, checking the voltage. No voltage. So I wasn't getting power to here. Just to verify what I had done, to make sure that what I was looking at was actually what I was looking at, I had a jumper cable that I actually jumped from the 30 amp breaker, and using a pin type connector here, I jumped it up to the red wire there on the switch, and then when I turned the switch on, whammo, I had power. So that's telling me that the problem is somewhere between the switch, the red wire, the hot wire from the switch, back to this connector here, this 5-pin connector back in the fuse section. Obviously was not getting power to the switch, which I found no reference to that anywhere in the manual. I even went to a Honda dealership, talked to a mechanic. He said, nope, that's probably not your problem. I would think it would be such and such and such and such. And I asked him 2 or 3 different ways. You know, if it's not getting power to that switch, would that cause the problem? Obviously it has to, right? Anyway, long story short, I started digging into here. I'd already checked all the breakers, the fuses, and everything down on this end. And so finally, I decided to pull all this out. And you got to take the battery out. You've got these little snap out pins here. Pull the fuse box out, pull everything, just so you can get access to it. And I started messing, and look what I found. This is the hot wire coming off of the fuse, off the 30 amp fuse, going to this 5-pin connector, which goes from here all the way up to the switch. Still, before I dug into all that and said, okay, that's got to be it, I decided to try one more test. I ran a jumper wire from here, or actually from here, from the hot side of the breaker. I jumped it into the pin hole that this wire came out of, turned the switch on, it works. So obviously the problem is this wire here had a bad connection, and eventually I guess it must have got enough corrosion on it that it wasn't making contact. It wasn't completely out like that. I mean, it wasn't out, it was actually stuck up in, still stuck into the connector, but it just wasn't soldered or whatever tight enough that it was making the connection to give me power to the switch. So anyway, from here on out, I'm going to see what I can do about reattaching this into this 5-pin connector. And once I get that accomplished, if I can get it accomplished without having to buy, my guess is that Honda's going to want to sell me a whole new wiring harness. I'll look into this. If I can take this apart and repair it, I'll make a video of that also. But anyway, I hope this will help somebody who has this vintage Honda. There's a lot of information out there, but everything that I read sort of steered me away from the idea that it was the switch not getting power. They talk about it could be the switch, it could be this, it could be that, but nothing ever addressed the idea that you're going through 2 5-pin connectors to get to the switch. And like I said, the Honda mechanic even said, well, you know, you need to check your ground wires. Well, if the starter's turning over, the ground wires are working fine. So anyway, like I said, hope this helps somebody.